Hello and good evening. My name is Sascha Keilholz. I'm directing the International Film Festival Mannheim-Heidelberg, and I now have the pleasure to introduce you to 4 filmmakers who attend our 69th edition this year. So I start with Sabrina Doyle. Hi Sabrina, great to have you. Sabrina studied at the is of British heritage, I think that's the right way to pronounce it, but studied in Los Angeles at the film school, then went back to the BBC for 6 years, I guess.
The other way around.
The other way around. First BBC,
then film school, yeah.
Then film school Los Angeles. And I just very recently had the opportunity to watch a very early short film of yours, Polanov. You did quite some short films which were very successful touring festivals, and also now your first feature film, your debut, LORELEI, had a very successful run at festivals. I guess it started at Tribeca, and then it won a prize at Deauville, a very prestigious festival with dots to Cannes. And we're very happy to have you here. Welcome.
Thank you for having us. It's a shame not to be there in person, but this is lovely, so thank you.
Yeah, let's do our best this way. Next, I want to introduce you Ruthy Pribar. Hi, Ruthy. She's at home as well.
Hi.
Ruthy, you graduated at the Sam Spiegel Film School at Jerusalem. Also did some short films. Your short film Last Calls won numerous awards, I guess, back in 2012. And you as well have your feature film debut, Asia, with us here in the competition on the Rise. It's great to have you. Welcome.
Thank you.
And I think your film also premiered at Tribeca, is that right?
Right.
Yeah, okay. So we have many parallels and also difference we will talk about later here. There's someone right next to you on the screen, and also not so far away from you is Dani Rosenberg, hi Dani.
Hello.
Is outside a coffee shop, I guess.
Yes.
And you also studied, I think you studied at the same film school as Ruthy, just a couple of years earlier, if I'm right.
Exactly.
And 2 of your short films premiered at the Berlinale. And you worked on television, on different television series, and now your much anticipated feature film debut, The Death of Cinema and My Father Too, is our opening film here, and was also selected by Cannes, by the Cannes selection this year. So thanks for being here. Nice to have you, Dani.
Well, thanks for having my film, and it's like I already told you, it's amazing honor for us, for all of the crew of the film, and I wish we could be with you, but we are in a way still with you now.
Yeah, that's the idea, you know, and on some ways to be together and to find a platform. And last not least, I want to introduce Nicolás Pereda, also outside. Hi, Nicolás.
Hello.
The difference from what I said before is, Nicolás, you already have quite a number of films under your belt, feature films. FAUNA, your latest film, is with us in the section Pushing the Boundaries. Your film screened in Oberhausen, Rotterdam, Locarno, Venice, Cannes, won several prizes. And I think FAUNA just premiered a couple of weeks ago in Toronto. So we are very happy to have the German premiere here with us, and now especially to have you with us here, Nicolás. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. I'm really happy to be here.
Thanks. So to all of our guests, welcome to the Director's Talk. It's very important for us also under these circumstances of an online festival to present the authors, the artists, the directors, and find a platform to talk to each other, to create a dialogue. And all of you already sent greetings to the audience, I think, which was very kind. And with some of you, we had the opportunity already to talk briefly. And now we will have the chance to talk with the audience as well. So this is an experiment kind of a roundtable, an online roundtable. We want to talk about your relation towards cinema and give the audience the opportunity to ask you questions. I'll start randomly, and I hope, you know, just fill in and come in whenever you feel. So Ruthy and Dani, I just mentioned you went to the same film school, but there are also similarities concerning your films. Both of them have parent-child relations in the center, and I think on a very personal level, both of you became parents during the process of your project, which kind of mirrors, you know, things on screen. So, could you give us a bit insight of your productions and these personal relations? Maybe starting with Ruthy.
Well, yeah, I mean, Asia is a film about motherhood, and I actually wrote it. I started writing it before I became a mother. So I wrote it in a way from the perspective of a daughter. But because making films takes quite a long time, I actually became a mother when we started. I mean, I became pregnant when we were in pre-production. It is a very long story, so I'll make it short. But when I found out I was pregnant, I decided I'm going to shoot the film anyway. I'm going to do it while I'm pregnant, and I was very, very strong-minded about it. But as I found out not very later, after that, is that it's impossible in Israel to get the production insured when the director is pregnant. So I had to actually postpone the film and shoot it a year later. So before I became a mother, I was already making these sacrifices to make in my career and in what I was dreaming about, which was to make this film. So I think a lot of these feelings got into the film, and when you become a mother, you realize that you all the time have to make these sacrifices. It doesn't change. So I took all of these things that came into my life and put them into the film. So the film sort of, in a way, speaks in these two languages. One is the daughter and the other is the mother, and both of them are in the film. So in a way, it was a blessing in disguise, because I got to bring so much of my fresh mother experiences into the film.
Yeah, and Dani, your personal life obviously, you know, had quite some impact on your film.
Well, to say the least, yes. I think that for me, to be a father was not something that actually I had a desire for during the shooting of the film. I was fear of being a father. And I think that this fear is also inside of the film. I didn't know what's the meaning of fatherhood in the perspective of a father. I think that the lost battle to get time with my own father was because in a way I knew that when he was gone, so it will be my turn to become the adult. So, but I feel that after after I finished the first round of with my father, so without really want it, I feel that I found myself more ready to be a father.
And apart from many other things, your film is also, you know, a reflection on truth and fiction. And I think this is something where also Nicolás comes in with FAUNA. You know, the same could be said about your film, and you deal with it on very different levels. You know, and we talked about this before, I think both films show the transformative power of cinema in a way, in transforming reality and truth, in a cinematic way. With FAUNA, I think, it creates a story within a story, a film within a film. On the other hand, it's very tangible. It's a very tangible comment on current Mexican society, as well as Dani's film is on the Israel state of mind. Would you be able to explain how your strategies achieving both in your films worked? Maybe first Nicolás and then Dani.
In my film, it's funny because it has different starting points, and it's a little bit of a messy film, but one of the starting points was the fact that a very close friend of mine, and a guy that is in a lot of my films, has a small part in the TV show Narcos, this TV series that I don't know how famous it is outside of, like, in your countries, but in Mexico it became a very important sort of like a TV show that lots of people are watching. And it's for me, it was a strange phenomenon because it's a TV series that is writing history, basically. Like they're historical pieces, and they're the way people are understanding our contemporary reality of violence in Mexico. And at the same time, they're totally crazy, like wild in their representation of the actual violence. And it's quite misguided, I think, as well, and very entertaining. And having such a close friend being part of that, and I'm interested in these ideas of representation, how representation can be very problematic, or how, anyway, many different things about representation. I thought it was an opportunity for me to talk to him and say, hey, let's make something that reflects on your life and the fact that you're part of this cast, and also for you to start thinking as well, like, what does it mean for you to be part of this machine of representation of contemporary history in Mexico that is creating a parallel narrative of the actual events. And so the characters of my film, most of the characters in all my films, they are, because I work with my friends who are actually actors and they have a theater company. I've been working with them for a long time, so they represent themselves in some ways. They keep their names and they talk like they talk and they walk like they walk, and they don't I never sort of create characters. Let's say I write things, and whatever I write has to be modified to fit them. So it's not like the actors understand what I wrote and then become something. Is the opposite process. Is I write something, and whatever I write adapts itself to the people I'm working with. And so the film, it was actually, I've never made a film that we had tension while shooting. We're all very close friends. We've been working. That's why I make a lot of films also, because they're very cheap and they're all with the same people, and it's kind of easy to get going. Sorry about the wind. But this time we had a little bit of tension because it was representing a part of someone's life that was, he was not totally proud of being in the show either. It's almost like he needed to make some, I'm not paying him well. He needed to make some money, so it made sense to have this conversation and so in that sense, while the film is perhaps more fictional than some of my other films that are more documentary-like, there was this thing of the life of a couple of, also they act as actors. The characters that I wrote are actors, so it is linked to their world, to their lives, to what does it mean to represent? What is the responsibility that actors have in their profession? I think I'll stop talking in a second. I think there is a lot of burden put in directors and producers and screenwriters in relation to the responsibility of their work. Like, you make something and people will, talk about the ethics of your work and so on and what you do, which I think is great. But I think actors tend to get away with a lot of stuff. It's almost like, I just did what they told me to do. And so I wanted to also talk a little bit about, why do actors do what they do? what does it mean to follow orders? And I think that is also connected to the current sort of political situation in Mexico with the kind of civil war that we're living. With a lot of distance, of course, but just kind of conceptually there are similarities of responsibility.
Yeah, Dani, do you want to join in?
Yes, of course. For me, it's actually the hybrid kind of language came from not from theoretical approach, but that's actually what's happened. I tried to make a film with my father. I shot documentary footage, and I failed. And after I failed, I just wrote a script, and in that script, I tried to reinvent life like I wish it could happen. Like I wrote a closure for me. I wrote a closure for me and my ex-wife. You know, I wrote the things that I never had the courage or the luck to say to all the close people in my life. And after I shot this film and edit the film, I understand that something is missing. I understand that there is like, I feel that I'm going in circles, but the center is missing. And the center is the footage that I had already with my father, with my family. So then I edit again the film using the documentary footage and the fiction film.
So, you know, both of your attempts in creating and recreating reality and history has to do with the people you work with and the surroundings. And Sabrina, with your film, the background is different, yet I think one quality of LORELEI is that it also very strongly depicts a social milieu. And there's something I think all of you did, that you very specifically chose your locations, the spaces and places you went on. Like Nicolás, you early on talked about the bar oasis that really exists, you know, and gave kind of, was nurturing to the story. And Sabrina, for example, at the end of your film, I think you told me the dive bar really exists, and you went there, and you went to places with real bikers and so on. Could you talk a bit about that influencing your film?
Yeah, I mean, for independent filmmakers, I think you just get so much. I mean, there's two things, right? There's the practical value of shooting in, I call them found locations. It's places that kind of, and really every one of our locations except the main house, which was an abandoned house that we turned into the family house and dressed, but every other location was an existing location. And the advantage of that, it's got all the texture, all the layers of history, all the sediments of people's lives already built into those locations. And you get so much as an independent filmmaker from, what you may be restricted in space and you may not be able to pull walls out or whatever, but you get so much richness and texture and history and character from these places. So part of it is practical, of course. And then, for me, I was scouting locations for about 1.5 years before I shot the film, and it really helped me write the script. It really helped me kind of imagine the spaces that I sort of sometimes would find a location and write a scene around that location because I love the location so much. And just really being a British person also making a film in the Pacific Northwest of America, it helped really ground me in those communities and that environment as well. So it was a really integral, like, location scouting and going through that process was really integral for us. And when we shot the film, the cinematographer and I spoke about not wanting to shoot too shallow, not wanting to sort of throw the background out of focus, really wanting to kind of have the space play as another character in the story. So yeah, I mean, just a sense of place. And I was always, I shot in the Pacific Northwest. I kind of had an obsession with the Pacific Northwest from the films of David Lynch and from Twin Peaks. And so I always wanted, I mean, then my film is nothing like Twin Peaks, although I think Nicolás's film is a little bit like Twin Peaks in its second half with all the characters changing. I mean, I we'll talk about Nicolás's film later, but I love that I love that it turns into a it sort of starts as a Narcos film and it turns into a David Lynch film partway through. But I, loved the Pacific Northwest from Twin Peaks really. And so had always just kind of wanted to shoot up there. And we got, a huge, I don't know about you guys, but I mean, we just got a huge welcome from so much of filmmaking is just practical, isn't it? I mean, you have your intentions, but then it's sort of, you have to make it happen. And the welcome that we got from the community in the Pacific Northwest of America was something that we wouldn't have had, I think, in Los Angeles, where I'm based. Usually I'm in London right now. But I think in Los Angeles, they're so kind of tired of filmmakers that, they're like, yeah, you're not willing to pay us $100,000 an hour for this location. Okay, go away. Whereas in the Pacific Northwest, we had an enormous welcome and such kindness and it really, I think in some ways the making of our film was a community thing where the whole community came together and made it happen. We wouldn't have gotten any of our motorcycles, for example, if the biker community in that area hadn't come out and supported us and basically bought all their motorcycles just to support us and for free. And so that was incredible. And so it was a real sort of community achievement to the making of this film. And I don't think we would have had that in a bigger film, in a place that's sort of used to kind of having film productions there.
So it's interesting to see, that I think Nicolás worked with friends and colleagues with a theater group, a close circle of people. Dani, obviously, even with family, and you said with a community. Ruthy, how was it for you, and how was your approach towards places and locations?
Well, the entire film was shot in Jerusalem, in the city. And what we tried to do is, because the film is, in a way, it starts very rich in locations, in characters, and it sort of quarantined in a way. The two characters are getting more and more quarantined in their home. So what we try to do is really get as much of the outside world, and then also while they're in their home, try to feel the outside world that they cannot reach. So all the time we had this back and forth between being inside and looking outside. So this was what we were looking for in the locations. We went for the apartment that was very high up. It was the top floor, and you could see really a lot of the landscape of Jerusalem. And then the other part of the film, which was shot in a hospital also in Jerusalem area, you could see the mountains. And it's not exactly like all the time you see the view, but you just feel that there's another layer that's always there for the characters to want to go out, to want to get free from the situation they're in. Yeah, that's the kind of locations that we were looking for. And we just went around, the cinematographer and I, and looking around for these, for the places that we felt could match for the film and how we saw it.
Talking about this intense relation you're depicting in your film, I think all of your films have very different ways in working with genre elements. I mean, Asia very obviously refers to the melodrama, and with your other films we have elements of social drama and thriller, and so on. Maybe Ruthy, would you like to go on and illuminate a bit, on that? How was it for you to, when we initially wrote about this talk, one thing I mentioned was breaking the rules. Since all of you kind of, are aware of these conventions and genres and find a way sometimes to undergo it. With Nicolás' film, probably, most obvious, in turning into Twin Peaks, maybe Twin Peaks, you know, the new Twin Peaks even more than the first one. But how was it for you, Ruthy? Is your film on the, you know, on the first view is probably the closest to what we call melodrama?
I think in the themes of the story, yes, it's very dramatic, and you know, it talks about a relationship and how a mother and a daughter become closer together at the verge of death. So it's very melodramatic in a way, but the way I treated it as a director and as a screenwriter was try not to get into these over dramatic scenes of a melodrama and take a more stoic approach. And I think part of it is the way the characters are reacting to their situation and being very in control until they cannot be in control anymore. So both of them, mother and daughter, are very strong-minded and not allowing emotions to get out very easily. So when it does happen, you feel like it's such a relief. And I think sometimes in melodramas, you would be emotional throughout the film. And here you get it, like the grand impact would be by the end of the film and not throughout. So I think that would be a way to say that to relate to the genre, but then change it.
Yeah, I can really very much understand what you were saying, you know, recapitulating me watching the film. Sabrina, with you, it's kind of the other way around, I think, not with you, but with your film, LORELEI. You know, it starts very much, you just said yourself, LORELEI is kind of a, you know, classical US independent way in ways of production. And in the beginning, it appears also to be narratively a classical, conventional US independent film, you know, with a story of catharsis and so on, with a guy Wayland coming out of prison. And then your film, I think, slightly and more, you know, delves into other ways and going around these genre topics. So how was it for you to transforming these genre plot elements into your very personal film?
Yeah, I mean, I think as filmmakers, I try to make films like the films that I really admire. So kind of what inspires me as a filmmaker is seeing films that I love and kind of wanting to do something that moves other people as much as I'm moved. So the films that I enjoy the most do toy with genre a little bit, and do sort of dip their foot in the water of genre, but then kind of subvert it. And so, you know, so with this film, so that's what I tried to do, and that was the intention from the outset. And so with this film, you know, part of it was having been born into a working class background myself, you know, family are sort of manual workers. I was the first person in my family to finish high school and go to university. So having been, and I very much, you know, sort of relate to some of the struggles of the characters in my films and kind of obviously drew from that to write the story. But I, you know, what I find with some films about, you know, people, you know, the lower, so people from sort of impoverished backgrounds or people from blue collar stories, is that the stories are often a bit depressing. Often I feel like, you know, audiences who would tend to be middle class audiences for this kind of film, right, or film literate audiences tend to look at these characters like people in a zoo, like animals in a zoo, and go, and the more if you can make them, the more you make your characters suffer, and the more misery you put them through, the more cathartic that is for the audience, and they feel that they've done something just by watching the film, and they feel that they've changed the world and gotten rid of poverty or something just by watching the film. And you know, I emphatically did not want to create a spectacle of poverty, and so, you know, really, so I tried to put as much joy in the film as possible, and I tried to have sequences that kind of exist just to show resilience, to show the characters' resilience, toughness, the fight in them, you know, the savageness of these characters as they fight for their lives and fight for their dignity and fight for their dreams. And everything from, like, I feel like so many films in this genre kind of have this washed out desaturated look. And I mean, again, we didn't want that either. So we specifically talked about kind of, when we planned for how the film would look, about how to sort of how to incorporate color and in the visual storytelling, and to have really color contrast. So even though the palette of our film is mostly blues, you know, to have like pops of warmth and pinks and magentas and stuff like that, to kind of really because contrast, I think, creates creates a more heightened emotion. And I didn't want this film to be flat and depressing, and so that was very important. And I think, you know, and sort of related to that, I really wanted to kind of get into the dream lives of the characters. And I think this is where the film really deviates from the type of film that we're talking about, is that there are sequences in my film that are dream sequences, or fantasy sequences, or, you know, sequences where we mix sort of, you know, reality, and it sort of, then it becomes something else. And I think that, you know, I feel that has met with people either love that and really like that about the film, and it's their favorite thing about the film, or they really hate it. And I feel like it's about your expectations about what this sort of film should be doing. And I'm personally, if I hear, oh, this doesn't belong in this movie, that kind of piques my interest about that movie. And I loved, you know, in Dani and Nicolás's films, how my sense of reality was very slippery, and kind of, I didn't know what was real and what wasn't real. And I kind of really enjoyed that. I really enjoyed not knowing what film I was in, and having my expectations about what film I was in subverted along the way. And, you know, and I think with LORELEI, it was just really important for me to sort of build in these dream sequences. And then the other thing I did, which I think is it's about the film is about a male character who comes out of prison and has to find his way, and sort of and he reunites with his high school girlfriend who has 3 children, and has to decide what to do with this family that he's inherited. And so traditionally what this type of story would do is, you know, the guy would stumble, he would fall, and then the family would help him get up again, and kind of that's what would happen, right? And they would be there to support his journey. But it was very important for me, for the female character who the film is named after, to not be a support to the main male character, but to really be an antagonist to him, so that she kind of pulls the story more and more as we go through the film. She takes the center of gravity of the story and pulls it towards her. And so really, you know, you think it's about his journey, and then at the end of the movie we go into her journey, and we realize that, you know, that maybe her desires are not compatible with his desires, and so you've got these 2 characters really competing for attention in the film, which again is not the classical Hollywood way of doing it, right? Like, you have a kind of, you know, usually the hero's journey is one person, and then the supporting cast all sort of, you know, assemble or fall away according to what the hero is going through. But I think that side of it just came from the feminist side of me, not wanting to have a sort of one-dimensional female character, really wanting to have a complex female character that could be quite unlikable. And, you know, I think the female character in the film, Dolores, behaves in ways that are unlikable sometimes, and sometimes people take issue with what she does. She leaves her children, for example. But, you know, I feel very strongly that I think that my favorite characters in films are anti-heroes. They behave in ways that are complex. They behave in ways that sometimes are difficult to accept, and that I find interesting. And I think that, you know, the more we have, you know, women making films, the more I think we will see that we will have more interesting women characters in films that are not sort of Madonnas or whores or mothers or whatever, you know, but that are actually kind of very complex characters that you know, and you can have a sort of goodness and bad intentions in the same character, and that can be okay, and that can be interesting. So, you know, I mean, and it's hard because, you know, again, some of the notes I got writing this script were, we don't like the female character, why would she leave her children, she's a horrible person. And I'm like, well, it's okay that she's a horrible person. And then I got notes, you know, about the way that the mother and daughter relationship, I don't know, Ruthy, if you got this, but the mother and daughter relationship, I got notes that was too tense and that should be a nicer relationship, which is antithetical to drama. But so, you know, I mean, I think a lot of it, but then I also leaned into genre, and I leaned into sort of, I have, bikers in this film and riding bikes and doing bikery stuff and drinking beer and having bonfires and, and I think some of that sort of visual spectacle I think is nice for audiences because they kind of can get their footing. They know what sort of movie they're in if you give them those kind of scenes. And, there's also like, I think a pre-existing mythology around that kind of character. There's the biker character, for example, that you can tap into as a filmmaker just to help the audience get their footing if you're trying to do something a bit different. I think it helps to kind of give audiences something that they're familiar with. If you're giving them something that they're unfamiliar with, you have to do both, I think.
Nicolás and Dani, Sabrina just talked very beautifully about the dreamlikeness in your films, especially with your film, Nicolás, and not knowing what is actually where's the reality right now, where am I right now? Maybe we start with Nicolás and then Dani. Nicolás, how did you create this? I wouldn't exactly call it Lynchian, but that's also not what Sabrina suggested. But you know what we're talking about. What's very special about your film? It is like these Russian, how are they called, matryoshkas? Where there's always another layer in it. How was it creating this very special?
Thanks, Sabrina, by the way, for mentioning our films. But it was strange for me, actually, because I tend to work with much simpler, at least situations or structures where this idea of kind of like a story within a story, the idea of the story within a story almost came as a result of the first part. So like the second part was kind of it felt to me like a necessary sort of natural offspring of the first part, because the first part, there are actors that talk about acting, that rehearse, that play actors. And so at some point I didn't necessarily want it to go that way, but it almost called me to say, okay, if you're all the time talking about actors representing things and all this stuff, then why don't you actually do the goddamn thing that they supposedly do? But then when I jumped into that world, and it's kind of suggested that it's going to start like a thriller and something like that, I realized at first I'm like totally out of my element in the world of the thriller. Like I would have had to perhaps seen a bit more, but also understand it a bit more. And more importantly, I don't think I'm totally capable of directing something like that. I mean, I enjoy them when I see them, but it's kind of it's a genre totally outside of me. So what I did was kind of perhaps sort of like the easy way out for me. It was automatically introduce sort of like the most mundane problems possible. So like there is this kind of thriller in which there's a man who's looking for another person who's disappeared, and it's like in the middle of the northern desert in Mexico. But the first problem is that he goes to this hotel and he doesn't have a towel, so he steals a towel from someone else, and then that person tells him off with the person at the hotel, and so it becomes sort of like this trouble because of a towel being stolen. And then so the whole tasks of the sort of like the film breaks into two. You think it's about this person's quest, and the person's quest kind of gets derailed constantly by absurd things, and he's kind of very passive about all these things that are happening to him. And I think that creates you end up in a place that you don't know what the hell is happening, because you're supposed to be watching this very concrete thriller that is suggested at some point in the film, and then you're never totally given it. Like you don't get to have the thriller. And I was thinking about what Sabrina was talking about in relation to sort of, I don't tend to think about audience enough, I think, and so I don't think about audience at all, perhaps, but I do think about audiences after the fact. So after you make the film, you watch it, and you're like, oh, what will people think? And I think that the only reason why this film, more or less, if some people like, it might be because there has some basic comedy in it. So while it seems like it's like when I think about the film, I think about all these different ideas about political ideas. But at the end of the day, what sustains a lot of this film, even within this sort of like matryoshka world, is just the fact that there's like this sort of enough jokes thrown in there, or like situations that are kind of funny, at least to me, that manages to kind of ride the sort of fragmented, almost nonsensical structure and story. Anyway.
Yeah, Dani, I think you have to add something there, because we once, on the one hand, we talked about multi-layered films, and I think yours has very, different levels of reality and narrative. And on the other hand, it's very obvious, even from the bits we see in The Death of Cinema and My Father too, of your early short films, that you are really influenced by genre films, and you have a very special way putting that into your films.
Well, I first, Sabrina, thank you, and I want to continue Sabrina's idea, because in her beautiful film, in LORELEI, so yes, the character, it starts with the main character and then change. And while we talk about Matryoshka, and the protagonist of my film want to make an American genre film. He want to take a hero, like a ordinary hero that have his will, his job, and like in a basic structure of American film. And I have this idea. I don't know if it's feminine or it's about feminine or manhood, but I feel that, the father figure in my film is like also the American structure. And when the father start to get weak and collapse, and the structure also collapse. And I can see that in a way, the alternative to this very basic structure, and that you can say also manly structure of question and answer of classic narrative, is a narrative that just asks questions and not give that answer. And so I don't know if that's what Sabrina suggests in a feminine structure, but I think that in my film, and it's also in my story, as the father reflects to the basic classic narrative, and the son try to, when the influence of the father become less and less strong, so the son could make a structure of his own, that it's not narrative basic, that it's not protagonist basic, that it's not a force basic of a hero that have to fight something. So that's the connection that I see between feminine and manhood and narrative in my film.
Well, now you already touched, there are two areas I would like to talk about with you. And we already touched is, you talk about narrative. So obviously you all are auteurs in a way. You wrote you write your own films. And I think you have very different but effective approaches towards storytelling, towards narrative. That's the one thing I would like to elaborate on with you. And the other thing is what we also already touched is obviously directing actors. The strength of your films, part of it is also our ability to connect to the characters, which is via storytelling, but also via the way you direct the actors. And from what you just said, we can hear these actors come from very different backgrounds. And I think you have very different ways. Obviously, in a film like FAUNA, just like Nicolás just told, there's a process of friends working together. And you said you don't really want them to act in a way. So, and maybe we start with you, Ruthy. You have two very strong female actors in really the center of the film. And I think Shira Haas, since then already became really famous with a Netflix series, Unorthodox. So maybe you can talk a bit, maybe we start with the acting, how your process on set is to, get the actors performing in a way that suits your idea of the film.
Well, for me, most of the work was before we went on to shoot. I'm a really strong believer in rehearsals, and because the script was very solid, the way I directed it was we didn't really change the script while we were shooting. Sometimes we need to make a little adjustments, but dialogue and everything was very fixed. So most of the changes happened during rehearsals. And this is also what made, I would say, made my job as a director on set. I mean, I just had to let them sink into the role. I didn't do that much while we were on set because we spoke so much before filming about the characters, about their relations with the actresses' own lives, and where, first of all, what we did is just to get to know each other. And I got to know so much about Alona and Shira, and just we would then talk about these situations in the scenes and how they're reflected in their lives. So what we did do is I tried not to have Shira and Alona become like best friends during rehearsals. And then although we met a lot before, I tried to keep them in a way separated, just like it was in the film, so they would be able to have this connection throughout filming and reach that point of a very strong bond that we see in the film. So that was the way, my approach to their acting. But I have to say, they were both really, they're extremely talented actresses. So I was very blessed in that sense that I got to work with these amazing talents, and it's just it made my job a lot easier.
And Sabrina, I already said that the last time we talked, I mean, you obviously have two very prominent and great actors in the main roles, but there's also a great supporting cast, and you also worked with very young actors, child actors. So maybe you could elaborate a bit on your work there.
Yeah, I mean, with actors like my leads, you just have to get out of their way. I mean, they know so much more about what they do than I do, and I mean, in fact, then they brought so much to the table. Actually, I mean, we didn't really improvise that much, but there are a few instances in the film where the actors just had a really good idea and we went with it, and that was, that was just a joy to see them really just inhabiting the characters and really kind of really thinking through logically what the character would do in this situation, and sometimes questioning my logic, which was great and so much fun for me to just I didn't feel like it at the time, but like in retrospect, just the kind of the level of emotional intelligence I think that my actors, my two leads had was incredible. And then my children had emotional intelligence too, but it was raw. So none of my three children had acted in a film before. But they're smart, and I think good actors are smart. They understand people, they understand emotional situations, and they ask questions. And all of these children did that, from the youngest, who was 7, to the oldest, who was 15. And I was really lucky in that my lead actors helped me with the children. So Jenna, my female lead, had been a child actress herself. She started acting when she was a child. So she knew exactly where these kids were coming from. And she knew, she just understood emotionally what it's like being on a film set for the first time. I think it's, you sort of don't, if you're on film sets all the time, you don't really think about what it must be like to a child coming onto a film set where suddenly suddenly everything, all their needs are catered for. They have like a table that's full of chocolate that they can visit at any point. They have, you know, they have chairs for them that they can sit on. It must be a very strange thing, especially to children who are raised to be humble, and kind of, as all my children were. You know, it's a sort of, so it's a whirlwind for them. It's you know, it's really an adventure to be on a film set. But my actors really helped me shape the performances with the child actors. So, for example, in the scene where the Jenna is trying to make her youngest child, who's kind of, I mean, it's not said in the film, but the child is non-binary. She's trying to make her child wear pants, and the child prefers to wear dresses, but she doesn't want the child to be bullied at school, so she's trying to force them to wear pants. And in that scene, the child character has to spit at the mother, and that's obviously, like, for a 7-year-old, a horrible thing to have to ask them to do, because they're, you know, these children were so polite, so sweet, raised so well by their parents, that it's something that they would never dream of doing in real life. And so really getting them to the point where they feel comfortable doing that, and it felt real, and it felt like it came from a place of, you know, that I wasn't forcing them to do it, but that they really came from the character. Really, I was so lucky, because Pablo and Jenna they were the scene partners of the children in these scenes, and they helped the children get there. So, you know, Jenna, for example, gave Parker permission to spit. She said, "You can spit at me, let's practice, spit in my face, spit here, kick me, you can kick me harder, it doesn't hurt." And she really just gave Parker the confidence to do those things in the scene that Parker felt uncomfortable doing. And equally, you know, Pablo, in the scene where Chancellor, the character, the actor who plays Dodger, punches him. Again, that was a hard scene for Chancellor to do, and it was hard for Chancellor to sort of build up that level of aggression towards Pablo, especially as Pablo's so big as well and so tall. And Pablo really helped him get there. He, you know, even when Pablo was not being filmed, when we were shooting over Pablo's shoulder and we were shooting Chancellor, Pablo really gave Chancellor what Chancellor needed to have a reaction. And he, you know, he acted his heart out, even though he wasn't being filmed at that point. And he did it so that Chancellor could get to where he needed to be. And some actors don't do that, right? Some actors, when you turn the camera around and you're filming over their shoulder, they dial it down a bit and they save it for the actual take where you're on them. But he, you know, he didn't do that. So both of my actors, I would say, were incredibly generous, and really helped get those performances. I mean, not only with their own performances and giving of themselves for their own performances, but really helping the supporting actors who were less experienced get to where they needed to be. And I think, you know, they understood that the film works if everyone worked, you know, the film works if all the characters work, and if the relationships work. And so they were really integral to helping me achieve that.
So Dani, a peculiarity about your film obviously is that you did not only choose an actor to play your father, but also an actor to replace yourself or to mirror yourself.
Yes.
How was that, to find not only your father but yourself for the screen?
Well, I think it was harder for all the actors in Israel that I made auditions, because I look for my father. So it was, you know, I actually obsessively audition on all the actors in Israel, try to be my father, and didn't find anyone. And then I just, you know, for the laugh of it, asked Marek Rosenbaum, that is the leading producer in Israel, and for me is a father figure. And I asked him, "Why don't you make an audition?" He said, why not? And I really like it. And I feel that, you know, he has something. He has something in him that is something that I remember also in my father. And I made another audition. I felt it's just working, you know. And because I do believe that actors, as much as good they can be, cannot pretend of something they don't have. You know, the camera is something mystical, and it captures our soul. And Marek, the lead character that plays the father, has this something in his soul that most of the actors that I checked just didn't have. So so that's why So sorry, the coffee. So that's why I took him, and then the next obstacle was to find his son. And again, all the actors in Israel, and I try all of them, but didn't find anyone. And Ronnie Kuban is a friend of mine, and he looked a little bit like Marek, like the father. So they met, they made like audition for me, and I feel it was just accurate. And I felt that this realism that they give to the screen is something that I cannot get with the regular actors. And that's why I took my mother, because I said, okay, I said to myself, if I have this non-actors kind of approach, so my mother will just be fixed for it. And she didn't really act. She just reenact situation that she know from the past. So that was the set. And Noah Kohler, that plays the wife, she's for me, one of the leading actresses in Israel. She's amazing. And she's so good, so I felt that she could be realistic like those non-professional actors.
Yeah, thanks. I don't know if you know Mark Rosenbaum. He was here at the festival for several times actually.
Ah, really? No, I didn't know it.
As a producer, yeah. Please give greetings from us to him.
I will.
We're going into our last round of questions, but then we will be open to questions also from the audience. Nicolás, you already told us a bit about your work with the actors you know. I don't know if you want to add on that, but we can also go over to the next topic. We already sensed you have very different styles in writing, and obviously different ideas of storytelling. And I would really like, to know your vision a bit about that process of writing and putting, your stories to the screen. Maybe you could just start, Nicolás, if you feel like it.
Yeah. So I'm not a writer, so I don't write often, and I don't. I don't find the writing process a very natural process, but I find that for film, I can write as in a similar way that when you direct, you're just kind of standing around and everybody else is, like there's a camera person and there's a sound person and the actors, and you just kind of shoveling things around. You're not actually doing that much. The writing process for me is not that different in that it's kind of like a collage process where the things I'm reading, I steal a little bit from a novel here and there, or then I watch something. And for example, the film is called FAUNA, and it's the same title of a novel of a Uruguayan writer. And I took the idea of Flora and Fauna being sisters and a little bit of that thriller from that novel. But there's a scene in which a mother and a daughter are rehearsing what looks like a play, and that's from Bergman's Autumn Sonata that I took. And then obviously there is a huge part of Narcos that actually the actor Diego Luna says that is in the film. And there's also some dialogue that I took from a Cassavetes film that it doesn't make any sense in my film. It looks like nonsense, and that worked, but it was actually from, I think it's from Husbands. And so this film I was very attentive while I was writing to the things that I was reading and the things that I was watching, and it all kind of started coming together. And then I was also reading a book about a political science book on this situation in Mexico, on the cartels, and it's a book that is called "The Cartels Don't Exist," and it's very challenging the sort of the main idea of how the cartels operate in Mexico. I thought it was a very interesting book, and so I was thinking about the ideas of the book, and then also the ideas of all these other materials, and then trying to siphon all of those ideas into something that more or less looked like a screenplay. And at the same time, because I work with this, just for going back to this actors world, the actors in my films, the three young actors are in a theater company, and they work with each other all the time, and they're like best friends with each other, and they see each other every day, and they're directors and actors and writers, and they do their own thing. And so I was also thinking about them. So I had all these materials and I had them, and so I funnel everything, all of these ideas through them. And so then the writing is not it feels very fragmented as well when it's on paper. But then when they show up, they're a unity themselves. And so they know each other so well. That's why also I don't need like Ruthy was mentioning that she does a lot of rehearsals, and there's like an important process in the rehearsals. And for me, because it's almost like they are all the time, like their connections with each other and so on, it's almost something that is already given because of the relationship they have. And so I don't need to sort of, the whole process is more kind of, it pre-exists. The rehearsal pre-exists my ideas and my films, and they're already kind of a unity. And so I just throw some things, and they manage to make it seem a little bit more organic than on paper. On paper, the film is even more of a mess than the film itself, but I think the actors manage to make the writing a little bit more feasible. And they do, while I think of them when I'm writing the dialogues. I think who's gonna say it. I know how they talk. I know what kind of works for them, and I write. But then they're not improvising exactly, but they alter, and they also choreograph themselves a lot. So like I tell them what to do, and then it's a bit funny to work with them because they don't let me direct that much, and so I give them the scene and they organize it while I'm doing the camera, and then they show up and they're like, okay, we got it, watch it. And so I just watch whatever they organized, and they tend to, they understand also what I'm interested in. So, I mean, I talk a little bit about production because the writing process for me is not ended. I shoot with very little money, which allows me to write and shoot right away. Like I don't need to apply for funds and things to make the film. So I'm writing, I finished the first draft, and I called all of my friends and I say, hey, let's get together to make this. And then obviously in the 2 weeks that passed between we organized some things to start shooting, some other ideas come, and they have their own ideas. So the writing process continues while we're making the film.
Yeah, it sounds very interesting, the collaborative side of this, of this work. Ruthy, how is it for you? Not only the writing process, but also your approach towards, narrative and storytelling.
For me, the writing process usually starts off from an idea or a scene or a part of a story that I find that doesn't leave my mind, that it just consumes my thoughts. And I tend to just think about it until I find a way to start to write about it. And then I would usually go on to structure. And the way I write is, there are so many different ways to write. But what I do is I just, it's like a flower that opens up, because I write very little in the beginning, and then every scene I would need to develop. So in a way, the first draft of a script that I write is non-readable to anybody else but me. And it has very little things in it. And it's very short. So then I would have to develop it into a full script. And part of it is, for me, research. And research doesn't necessarily mean to meet other people or to go outside or to seek a community. It can be, but it's also about an inner research and finding what is for me so interesting in the idea that I started working on. What is for me, what is the emotional anchor, and from when I understand what's my emotional anchor and why I'm so interested in this, then it's much easier to write.
How is it for you, Dani?
Well, like you mentioned, I made before the film 2 big series in Israel. By the way, one series, Milk and Honey, was adapted to German television before 2 years. And because I make those series and I wrote a lot of television materials, I just start to hate narrative, because I really hate, I like narrative. I found narrative, not now, but when I'm making television, I so hate narrative, because I feel it's so easy to make narrative. Like I feel that, like I don't, well, don't quote me, the people that watch, but I feel like someone that know how to make heroin, and I really don't want to use this heroin, because I don't want to be like this addicted people that use the heroin. So that's how I feel for narrative while I'm making television, because I say, okay, I know, 3 acts, I know plots, I know how to do it. And because I know to do it, so when I write this film, and now my next project, I just try to, to demolish the narrative as much as I can, and not to find any basic reason like a classic narrative. But actually, it was before. Now it was already 1 year since the last television project, so now I really like narrative again, and everything is cool. But then it was a nightmare. Yes.
Okay, now we have 2 questions from the audience I will ask you now, but maybe Sabrina, since Dani already talked not only about demolishing narratives, but also the future projects, how is it with you? What are you working on? Where at the process stage are you right now? And you need to unmute so we can hear you.
I'm writing a screenplay right now, and I mean, it's so interesting. Screenplays are, I mean, it's an iterative process. You have to have several passes at your many passes at your screenplay. And I think if members of the public certainly could see my first draft of the screenplay, they would be horrified. I mean, it's full of like bits of cliches, bits of things that make no sense, and sort of, I mean, you sort of, it's kind of you just vomiting out stuff that you've heard. It's like a stream of consciousness, and slowly, you sort of refine it in subsequent drafts. And for me, I think, what I find helpful is having, in terms of character work, is I'll have a pass of the screenplay where I'm focused on one character, and then and I just do a draft where I'm focused on making that character more lived in, and then I'll do another character. And so I think that's how you give your supporting character, for me at least, supporting characters some care and attention. And that's a sort of very character-based approach. But I do think that the screenplay format is limited. I often think, well, I would love to write a screenplay that had pictures in it, or that had montages in it, or that, because there's so much of the cinematic language that you can't write down. And I feel that we box ourselves in as filmmakers. We kind of, especially, if you're trying to raise money for your film, you write something quite linear, quite conventional, when the cinematic language sometimes, and I feel like there's a draft of your screenplay that you write to get funded, but then you do need to throw that out, because there's a language of cinema, and the language of cinema you can't write in words. It's a look can say as much as 10 lines of dialogue, but if someone reads your screenplay and you say that there's this look, they won't understand what that look does. And so I feel that the screenplay format is inadequate. It's a starting point, but you rewrite your film all the time, in the edit, on set. And that's important. It's important not to stay too wedded to the screenplay, I think, because it really is just the beginning.
I think it's very nice knowing your films. I think I can kind of understand what you're saying by this. And there's a direct question for Nicolás, referring to something Dani said. Nicolás, do you share Dani's hate for the heroine, the narrative?
Not exactly. I don't consider narrative too much. It doesn't cross my mind that often, and so it's more like it's kind of outside of my preoccupations. And so the problem is that, for example, I would never be hired to direct TV, for example, or to write. And I have many friends now that do it. And in a way, it's a blessing, because then I don't have to kind of make that gamble, make that trade of, you know, I'm never put in that situation whether, you know, someone offers me to make this narrative thing that I can imagine it being very, you know, they pay well and maybe you want to do it, but I'm just kind of unable. And I'll just tell a small little story. I was hired in 2012 to make a film, and this was kind of in Mexico. This is strange. You can hire it for TV, but it's strange to get hired to make a fiction film. Like you have nothing to do, and a producer calls and say, I have this screenplay that I bought, I have some money, and I'm gonna pay you well, and you're directing. And at the time, I had no money, I didn't have a job. My kid was like 4 years old, and this is like 10 years ago. And I said, yeah, sure, like this is great. And then we went on set, and I read the screenplay, and we had like a very long process that I never had, like 6 weeks of pre-production and 6 weeks of shooting. And I was reading, and I was like, I don't even understand the screenplay. I don't know what this is about. Like, it was very, very difficult. I could follow like a narrative, but the whole format, the whole thing was kind of complicated. And then when we started shooting, I just realized I cannot do this. And so I looked at the production, like where were we gonna shoot? And I invented a new narrative. And so like a series of situations. It was kind of a disaster at the end. Like, the film has nothing to do with the screenplay, but it was not it felt, for everybody around, it felt like I was being kind of punk about this situation, but it was totally like an inability to deal with narrative, with someone else's narrative, in fact. And while FAUNA and my films do have an element of narrative, it's not something that I consider. So when Dani mentioned that, you know, it's something that he understands and he knows his 3 act things and he can generate it. For me, I mean, I'm a bit envious of that sort of that ability, of being able to. I'm very good friends with an editor who edits like big films. His name is Jakob Schulzinger, and does like like The Square and those movies. And he also talks this way about narrative. He's like, you know, it's so easy, you just, you know, piece it together like this. And for me, it's this total sort of crazy beast.
There's another question. A question for everybody or whomever wants to answer. Is cinema for you a way to keep on dreaming, or for thinking about how to better live? We already talked about David Lynch and, you know, Mulholland Drive and so on, but what do you think? Yeah, I think this comes from us talking about the dreamlikeness of films, but I don't know. You have to answer.
I mean, I think that cinema, cinema has kept me, writing has kept me sane during the lockdown. You know, it's a form of therapy for me. And I find that the imagined life, a life in stories, I think the stories we tell are maybe the most important thing that distinguishes us as a species, is the fact that we're storytellers. We think ahead to the future, we reflect on the past, we try and find patterns, we find links, we're superstitious. And I think that for me, a life that is a meaningful life, a life in story. And I think it is a way to keep dreaming, but it's also a way to live. It's kind of a little bit of both. I don't think that films are didactic. I think that they are sort of, you know, in the sense that you look at a film and you sort of take it into real life. I think that if you can, you know, a life lived in cinema, and, you know, this is the privilege, the enormous privilege of being filmmakers and film lovers, is that we are immersed in this world. And I think it's, you know, I feel very fortunate, because for me, it's a lifeline.
Is there anything you guys want to add?
Only to elaborate on this, that we are fortunate that we have it, that we have this this option to dream through cinema. And you know, in this lockdown, in Israel, they didn't open the cinemas since March. And for me, I now talk as a cinema lover, not as a cinema director. I feel that, it's the first time in my life that I really dream less. I feel that it's really affect my life because I need, the big screen. I need this 3, 4 times a week that I just sit in this hall and watching a dream of someone else. So yes, in one word, I do believe that to live this life of cinema is to live, to in a way keep the dreams, and it's an opportunity that we have. Yes.
Maybe that's a nice point to end with. We talked about this in the beginning. It's very special and peculiar to meet at these circumstances. We are all kind of dependent on what's happening with the pandemic, and I guess this is what unites us: the hope for going to a theater soon and watching movies like your movies. That whatever dreamlike or not, via being art, help us reflect on things and give us sensations and become a part of our life. So thank you very much for joining us here in this special occasion. Thank you very much for your films. We already get, even if it's online, we're really getting nice reactions from the audience, enjoying your films, having their special festival feeling, which is maybe more, in some ways like binge watching, but binge watching through a festival program. And it's good to hear talk if the way you are talking about each other's films. And I hope there's a connection we can build on. And I'm happy we can offer your films to the audience for one more week, for 5 days, and again then hope to see them soon in theaters again. Thank you very much. Thanks for your time. Thanks for your films.
Thank you.